see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.
What's up, everybody? This is Siosi Samuels, and you are tuning into episode 71 of the It Will Come Show, live streaming straight from my room. But today I'm going to be talking about what wolves have to do with my love for communities, Bitcoin, and nature principles. And the reason why I'm starting to share a little bit more about this is because, as mentioned in previous episodes, now is a great time for anyone really to be doing things similar to this and sharing their own opinions, beliefs, truths, and philosophies, right? Around what it is they're passionate about, what it is they want to be doing, or what it is they have been doing and are looking for ways to sort of turn things around and attract your own community. So with that, let's dig in. Okay, so first I'm going to start with this particular video. This is called How Wolves Change Rivers. If you have not heard of this before, it is essentially a video that talks about how in the United States they almost pulled all wolves out of existence, almost killed them off completely, and as a result of them doing that, they didn't realize how much of an effect it would have on the ecosystem in general. And what ended up happening is a whole bunch of researchers saw that without these natural predators, these wolves in places like Yellowstone Park, the environment actually started to shift. Because there were no wolves, it meant that there were more bison, and with more bison, it meant they were eating more grass, and then by eating more grass, that would lead to less for the other smaller creatures and critters, and it just had a cascade effect, right, on the entire ecosystem, and this actually put things out of balance. And as a result of that, they, after I think experimenting with a whole bunch of things, they realized that, well, hey, maybe if we just reintroduce the wolves, nature will sort itself out. And boy, did it actually do. So this video, I won't play it here, but I do highly recommend you check it out if you haven't already, because it's one that is extremely powerful. And it really goes to show how we are all connected. And that is something that we are definitely learning right now, right? Especially with coronavirus and the pandemic, we're realizing that something that happens way over there in another part of the world actually can impact us, because it doesn't matter the boundaries, it doesn't matter the national borders, etc. We are definitely all connected. And this is exactly what was highlighted in the video. So, going back. So with that, that's the first video I wanted to share with you guys. The next is I wanted to explain a little bit about sort of how I came to actually have a passion for wolves. It actually started back in 2007 and 2008. I actually highlight the story in a interview with Michael Hudson from Bitstocks. So if you want to check it out, you can just go to bitstocks.com/podcast/George Samuels. I will share the links in the show notes after this as well. But specifically at 6 minutes and 36 seconds, I talk about this particular story. And now I haven't actually shared this story with a lot of people in the past openly. But considering everything that's happening in the world right now, I thought it was a good time to start doing so, right? Because there's so many facets to us as individuals, so many things about us that we don't always necessarily share in the public sphere due to criticism, fear of criticism, fear of rejection, fear of all these sort of things. But if there's anything you can learn as you grow up or mature, experience more of life, it really doesn't matter. If you have something to say, say it. Of course, be respectful, be mindful, but still speak your truth. And so, this particular podcast interview goes deeper into that story. So that happened in 2007 and 2008. And essentially involved this sort of vision dream that I had, which led me down this path of exploring and learning as everything that I could about wolves. And what I became fascinated by was sort of, the history and the links between wolves and some of the world's most mightiest empires. Right, one of them is the Mongol Empire. So if you didn't know this already, the Mongols actually conquered almost half the world in terms of land mass. Right, I don't think anyone's come close to date. The only problem with the Mongols is they didn't really force their culture or their ways onto others for the long term. One of the things that they did actually was, yes, they might have conquered quite a lot of groups of people and other nations, but they allowed them to actually still practice their own religions, beliefs, ways of governing themselves, and really only cared about maybe taking taxes and payment for security. But only looking back can we really look at it as such. Of course, during those times, it wasn't pleasant at all because there were massacres and what have you. But you have to take history into context. There was a lot of warring, a lot of craziness going on during that time. But now, right, we are in a period of relative craziness too. So now this is from a game, but I'm putting here Clan of the Grey Wolf. So Genghis Khan and the Mongols actually believe that they are descendants from the Blue Wolf. So here, you can see the Blue Wolf, the novel of the life of Genghis Khan. And if you didn't know this already, Genghis, his actual name is Chinggis Khan. And if you go even further, Chinggis Khan is actually more of his sort of formal title, but his actual name is Temujin. And it's actually believed that Temujin or Chinggis, I think, a large portion of the world's population apparently have Chinggis Khan's DNA or ancestry, which is really interesting. But in my sort of learning about wolves in general, it led me to the story of Chinggis Khan and the Mongols. And it was really fascinating because if you look into the story, there's a famous movie called Mongol itself. Let's have a look here. Here, it's called Mongol. This movie is really, it's probably one of the best depictions of Chinggis Khan's life. And it really shows sort of the hardships that Temujin, before he became Chinggis, like the hardships that he went through. His father was killed by a rival clan member. He kept getting kidnapped. His mother had to take care of him and his siblings during dry times where they almost had no food. He got reprimanded, I remember one time, for almost killing his brother or something of the sort. And I can't remember if he did or if he almost did. And sort of just the hardships made him. And during this time, we're obviously we're not going through war times, but the effects and sort of what we find ourselves in right now could be similar. Probably more closer to the Cold War, right? And the fear of things happening. So yeah, I highly recommend this movie. But again, what you need to look at is sort of how Temujin actually observed wolves in the wild. And a lot of his sort of military tactics and strategies was based off of what he saw wolves do in the plains, the steppes of Mongolia. And that allowed him to actually take, a group of what you would call illiterate, right, uneducated nomads into one of the most ruthless empires ever known to man. And they would do things. Well, anyways, it's just very fascinating to watch and see how they actually learn from nature in terms of their hunting skills, right? And it doesn't stop with the Mongolians. You might be surprised or not to learn that even if you look at the Roman Empire, Romulus and Remus, oof, right? This is one of the most famous stories, right? So let's have a look here. Romulus and Remus. So, see this picture here, right? So it goes in terms of the mythology of the sort of the birth of the Roman Empire, that the two founding fathers or brothers actually were raised by wolves. And as a result of that, they took a lot of what they learned there and, birthed the Roman Empire in terms of structure and organization, etc. And this is probably not the first time that you've heard wolves relate to sort of structure, order, loyalty, those sort of things, or even how it relates to business. But I spoke about in this episode, right, that I would explain why I have a fascination with wolves in relation to communities, to Bitcoin, and then also just to life in general. And the nature principles. So so that's the Roman Empire, and then the last one I'll share with you is the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire. So they also have a legend that it says the wolf symbolizes honor and is also considered the mother of most Turkic peoples. Asena is the name of one of the 10 sons who were given birth by a mythical wolf in Turkic mythology. The legend tells of a young boy who survived a raid in his village. A she-wolf finds the injured child and nurses him back to health. He subsequently impregnates the wolf, which then gives birth to 10 half-wolf, half-human boys. One of these, Ashina, becomes their leader and establishes the Ashina clan, which ruled the Gokturks and other Turkic nomadic empires, the nomads. The wolf, pregnant with the boy's offspring, escaped her enemies by crossing the Western Sea to a cave near to the Kocho Mountains, one of the cities of the Tocharians. Man, I am probably pronouncing this horribly, so excuse me any Turks that are watching. The first Turks subsequently migrated to the Altai regions, where they are known as experts in ironworking, as Scythians are also known to have been. Right, so here again, we've got the gray wolf legend, right? If we look with the Mongols, they had the blue wolf. Notice that there are uses of different colored wolves. And actually, in some cultures, there are about 4 or 5 different colored wolves that govern different aspects of the universe. And each of them, even though they're all wolves, each of the colors represent different sort of niche aspects of those wolves. And so my particular story actually connects with the white wolf, the Arctic wolf, which is found mostly in the North American region. Right, and this goes back to, let's go here. Right, so here we have a interview that I did back in 2013 when I was actually known as a cultural animator. So if oh, and you can't even see my screen. Let's put it back. Here we go. So yeah, this particular interview was from 2013 and was when I was known as a cultural animator, because I was actually preserving indigenous myths and legends through animation. That was actually something I was very passionate about. And actually, the more I learned about wolves, the more I learned about how, a lot of indigenous cultures, have these stories of wolves, but also, teach the importance of bringing in nature principles into everything that you do. That essentially all the answers to all our problems can be found in nature. And, many religions and creators of religions, I want to say creators of prophets, they talk about this too. Buddhism, you can see this, Shinto in Japan, any sort of old religion that actually was very much based with nature. And this is actually a really important thing, because by connecting themselves with nature, it meant that their sort of way of looking at life or the world was always intrinsically tied to the environment in which they grow up, right? If you look at sort of the way that we see things right now in the West, a lot of our belief systems are completely disconnected from nature. Right? We think that we can just do our own thing and run amok and completely disregard nature. But because our belief systems has not been intricately tied with it, we're seeing the consequences of that. And so, this is something I think that is a very important reminder during this time to kind of bring things back to the roots, right? We're seeing how people now get to observe, right? By us all staying indoors, you see nature doing its own reset, right? Clearing up. There was a picture on Twitter I saw recently about people being able to see the pyramids clearly for the first time from a distance. China, I think they said that they could now see China clearly from satellite images, right? No more pollution. And again, nature principles. So yeah, this particular interview, if you haven't checked it out, I'll put it in the show notes. But this was actually an interview with a woman named Bernadine, who lives in New York. And she had actually a similar dream to me, or experience, relating to wolves. And she then dedicated herself to creating this educational series called Wolf Dog Tales, which has to do with her ancestry to her Mexican heritage. And, it's just really fascinating to see how people connect, with these similar things. Okay, so yeah, here again is just, there's a book called The Secret History of the Mongols. If you're a history buff and you really enjoy learning, highly recommend it. Again, it's a way for you to see and understand how Genghis Khan actually utilized or leveraged a lot of his observations of nature into his military strategy and tactics. And if you're a business person, right, there's always a lot of military books that people read to learn from, right? If we go to Sun Tzu, the Art of War, to so many other classics. And the secret history of the Mongols was actually something that I believe even the Germans and the Russians were fascinated by during their reign. And yeah, again, just even more fascinating. They've got a religion called Tengrism, I believe, and that is also based on the blue wolf. Okay, so here we go. Here we go. Just the Battle of Two Wolves. Here we go. All right. So I also created this article back in 2013. Wow. But this talks about an ancient Cherokee legend called the Two Wolves, and it talks about the battle for our attention within each of us. So one thing I learned from wolves was the delicate balance of nature, yin and yang. So you often hear me talk about yin and yang, right? Even our company Faya, which is a sponsor of this show, is about bridging gaps between people and technology, right? Balancing both. Because we could look into deep legends and myths as well, and you'll see often there are cautionary tales about how if we go too far in one direction, the other goes out of whack. We're currently experiencing that right now in the world. So let's go back. Cool. Yeah, so here, right, and I spoke about how I have a fascination, right, with wolves in terms of its relation to business, to nature principles, to Bitcoin. And it says, money became my indicator. If I was doing good, money poured in. If I was being greedy, money stopped coming. And this actually relates a lot to Bitcoin itself, which I might do another episode on, in terms of how Bitcoin deals with sort of imbalances around money and hoarding by creating a system that sort of penalizes those type of behaviors, or should. Of course, you're never going to completely get rid of greed, but the Bitcoin system actually leverages greed for potential good, and that's what I actually found very fascinating about it. Another tidbit as well is that for those of you who are not familiar with the entire ecosystem, there's a guy named Craig Wright, who's one of the strongest contenders for the name behind Satoshi Nakamoto, and he's also known as an iron wolf in some parts of the world. And I found this very fascinating because he also talks about the importance of nature principles and design in Bitcoin itself. So this Battle of Two Wolves, highly recommend you just look up Cherokee Legend, Battle of Two Wolves, and it just talks about what happens when you have conflict within yourself. And if you feed, I think the moral of the story was that a little boy was asking his grandfather, like, oh, if there are these two wolves fighting for my attention all the time, which one wins? And the grandfather, turns to the boy and says, the one you feed. And, this really goes into more about there's good and evil in all of us, right? I think if you've seen Star Wars or a fan of it, this is very much played out in that storyline. If you always have a choice inside of you of which part of you want to feed. If you want to be a good person, feed the things that make you good. If there are dark sides and you want to entertain that, well, then you will see what happens. And that is always being played out. But again, the separation is also the illusion. So that's the Battle of the Two Wolves. Okay, of course, right? So you might, if you've been tuning into the episodes, you might notice, right, I talk often about the pack. And the pack is literally a manifestation of my passion for wolves. And I've essentially used this as sort of my testing ground for everything to do with productive community. So not just community in the sense of support, right? That's one side. That's the potential yin side. But there's also the challenge side, which actually someone on Twitter was talking about recently. And let's see if I can actually find that, because it was a good point. I think it's from Rachel Happy. So let's load that up. Okay. Here we go. So this is from Rachel Happy, who's the leader of a company called Community Roundtable. She says, one of the biggest mistakes I see in communities is that there is a strong emphasis on support, but not an equal emphasis on challenge, right? Yin and yang. Without challenge, nothing changes. That tension is required to generate value. Challenge without support is also impossible. And of course, I had to plug in the pact. But this is exactly why I built the pact, because I saw similar things as well. When people talk about communities, there's a lot of emotions and feelings involved and support, which is great. But you need the other side, right? It's that tension, that creative tension, that is what helps people grow. You go too far on one side and it just becomes unbalanced, like we saw with How Wolves Change Rivers. Oops, and I don't think you're even seeing my Twitter screen. Oh, here we go. So yes, like How Wolves Change Rivers, right? You take the wolves out of the ecosystem, things go unbalanced. Put them back in, it's needed. And actually, this is an interesting sort of observation too. I remember there was a period where people were against bullying, right? And yes, bullying is bad, but also there's like this famous saying wolves make the buffalo strong. So I am definitely for the reduction of bullying, but also you got to allow that to make people stronger as well. This may be a controversial opinion, but I think if we try to get rid of the things that shape us, right, then you could experience something similar to what the wolves experience, or what Yellowstone Park experienced without the wolves, right? Often, especially in our society, we look at wolves as sort of the predators and the ones to be afraid of, and they're the evil ones. But wolves actually have a very social nature, and that sort of irrational fear has come from a period, if you remember the Salem witch trials, or the period in European history whereby essentially what happened was any creature of the night was deemed evil by the church. And so there was a period where people just went and started demonizing anything that symbolized or reflected the dark, which really is more a reflection of ourselves, right? Things that we don't want to discuss, talk about, bring up because of a fear, right, of it being too dark, is actually going to do us more damage in the long run. And this reflects out in our society too. The more you try to hide things and not allow truth to come out, the more you demonize it because you're afraid of it. And so, yeah, that was sort of the inspiration for the pack. I won't go too much into the pack because, I talk about it almost every episode. It's only because I'm proud of the community. They really have, this group has actually just moved and grown and evolved way beyond anything I could have imagined. But as I was talking about the white wolf before, so that's more of the color that I resonate with. Here is talking just about, in terms of symbolism, it's supposed to be a sacred, beautiful symbol of faith, love, and loyalty. And to see one even in dreams is a divine sign. So hey, I'll take it as a divine sign. And this particular article actually was from KPMG, right? If you know who KPMG are, similar to Deloitte and Accenture and all these folks, the big consulting firms, they did a piece called Wolfpacks in the Wild, Perfect Models of Teamwork. Now, this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? When it comes to communities, wolves actually teach a lot about it because they look at teamwork, right? Communities you can look at as sort of like a team of teams, and this is actually being used. There's a book by the same name, which actually really resonated because that's what it is. Essentially, communities, as you grow larger, you essentially have your family units, and you always need to remember that. So there's this whole thing of like the strength of the wolf is a pack, the strength of the pack is the wolf, right? Again, that balance. It's not just about the individual, it's not just about the collective, but both, constantly moving and turning. And so they often talk about in wolf packs, there was actually it's funny how things get perpetuated in society, but the whole hierarchical system of wolves, yes, it exists, but it actually can fall flat depending on the scenario or situation. When wolves hunt and are in survival mode, hierarchy actually is very, very important. Centralization is very, very important, right? Because without it, it goes into chaos and you can't coordinate things. And what is actually similar to this? Let's look at the West right now when it comes to dealing with our current pandemic. You'll see that societies that have had a culture of individualism and a call for decentralization of anything, looking at the Bitcoin blockchain space or the crypto space, that on the extreme becomes chaos, right? But if you look at other cultures or societies right now who've had more of a centralized form of government, then you'll see how they've been able to actually manage the current crisis, right? They've been actually able to handle it by just telling people, no, stop it. And it's really interesting because I see there's an observation I have even in Singapore, whereby I'm out walking and you'll see who are the ones wearing their masks at this point in time. All the non-Westerners, right? Who are the ones who are not wearing their masks? All the Westerners, right? And it really shows sort of just that belief. And it's like the individualism goes, don't tell me what to do, give me my liberty, my freedom, etc. But it can become a bad thing in a time like this when actually your individual actions have an effect on everybody else. And so I'm sharing all this because I believe in the future, like the best sort of solution will be the wisdom to understand when it is good for individualism, when it is good for collectivism. I think during a crisis, collectivism kind of needs to be enacted a little bit more so that we can have better coordination. Now, of course, built on truth. That's the hard thing in our current society. But, and then when times are a little bit less stressful, bring in that individualism. But it's never an either or. It's an and situation. So, yeah, I'll share this in my show notes so you can have a read. But essentially, wolf packs give a lot of wisdom and lessons on how to build productive groups, and I use that a lot when it comes to when it comes to building communities. Because the way that I look at communities, it's not something that can be planned out completely at the forefront or the beginning. It can be very organic. You have to be able to watch and observe a lot to see which elements of the group, right, come out, and then that becomes part of the system, right? It's ever evolving, it's ever changing, and of course you need to have some sort of tactical planning at the beginning, but you also have to allow for a little bit of chaos and uncertainty to come through, because that's just the nature of the game. There was this other book by Abby Wambach. Ooh, if I'm saying that wrong again, but yes, she is was all over social media at one point in time. U.S. soccer Olympic gold medalist. This book is highly recommended. But how to come together, unleash our power, and change the game, right? Looking at just what wolf packs again have to teach us. So you can see here, she created a culture not just of excellence, but of honor, commitment, resilience, and sisterhood. She helped transform a group of individual women into one of the most successful, powerful, and united wolf packs of all time, right? I mean, this just warms my heart. Yeah, but wolves have a lot to share in terms of success, resilience, commitment, especially during this time in the world. And with that, I think we have hit the end of this episode. So if you learn anything from this, I would love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to comment away. If you have any questions, just got a comment from Nat J. Thanks, Nat. But it's this time period, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. We're seeing a lot of webinars, a lot of discussions around the idea of resilience, right? If you look at wolves, they're the best example of resilience because they actually thrive during these type of periods, right? When it hits winter, you'll see wolves mostly out, more so than any other species, because they have the stamina, they have the endurance, they have the ability to go the extra mile, to go long and hard. And that's why in our program, The Pack, we often use the two words, patience and persistence, right? And again, just like the Wolfpack book, right, talking about excellence, one of the things that we track a lot is actually, results. But we have the yin and yang. We talk about what is, there's the emotional side that impacts our personal productivity, and then there's also sort of mental blocks, right, that can actually impact our emotions. And you have to look at both. You can't always just look at one or the other. But whenever we look at general productivity in the workplace, we often do not look at sort of the yin side, right? And then also the role of the group, the people around you, and how they impact your personal productivity, because that can affect a lot as well. Okay, so yeah, with that, thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. And as always, through patience and persistence, it will come.
The eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.